On Zoom, there are no members of the general public.
On the grant submittal. Matt, are you online?
I am.
Very
Hello,
nice.
good evening, everyone. Well,
Hello.
pleasure to see you all again. And we are unfortunately bringing some news that the Prop 68 grant was not awarded for the park site. We did do a debrief meeting with the state and got some notes to share with you all this evening. You know, I think per some previous correspondence and conversations, we did talk about how the demographics of the grant was a big factor there. It actually comes up to about 30 points for the entirety of the grant. So, and those are things that we can't quite control. Obviously, the site is where it's at, and we feel, along with the overall board there, that it's an adequate site as it's situated right in the middle of the community and adjacent to the civic services there. So we did our best to at least work around the site to find the most favorable location for what they call community grant or community fact finder. However, some of those demographics did not quite work in our favor comparatively to some other parks that submitted. So we did find out that there were other parks within the high desert that were awarded, and in finding out those, we did look at some of those a little closer to understand what their demographics were for comparison reasons. I see that Mike is joining us here, and actually he has some of those exhibits that we can pull up to look at, but you will see it's quite evident from that standpoint that the demographics for let's say Evadale Park in Victorville showed a disadvantaged community and median household income that was far less than what our park site was. So, you know, it's unfortunate. We certainly put our best foot forward, and you know, I think the result was getting a bit more community input and coming up with a design that was representative of the community. So, you know, there was a good output in that sense. It was also a parallel effort to the master planning of the site. So, in many ways, it helped to submit essentially in the same time frame that we were coming up with that master plan. But I'll turn it over here to Mike, who has the community fact finder results for the other parks within the high desert, just to look at those again from a comparison standpoint. And I think the power's in the numbers here once we start to look at those. And then Mike, did we have a fact finder for the Phelan Park here that we can pull up just to look at that? And if not, I can pull that really quickly. I think Mike, you may be muted there.
Yeah, the icons are so small I can't see who's who.
Probably looking for his button on Zoom, I'm assuming. Well, if you pull that up, Mike, I'll go ahead and talk over them for us. So the one that he has up on the screen here is for Evadale Park in Victorville. And I think if you just hover over, Mike, some of the statistics that are a big factor of the grant here. So the total population is one that, you know, I think in a way was a bit more favorable for Evadale Park, considering it's in a little bit denser area of Victorville, and there's a bit more houses there. Not too much more than what we saw, but I think the big thing here is that it is far lower in terms of median household income at 21,000, and then the per capita income is at 9,000. So far lower than what we're seeing at the park here in in feeling. So that was one thing that was pretty evident there. And then as you can see in the image, there's a yellow color gradation that's underneath that red circle. That red circle represents what the state looks at in terms of the demographics. So all the demographics here are pulled from that red circle, which is, I believe, a half-mile radius around the park. But one thing that's clear here is that it's in a severely disadvantaged community. And anytime you see that, that's going to boost the points up quite a bit. What we did.
Let me bring up Phelan's for comparison. So the population that you get in the same half-mile radius from the park site, we always tried to find the best corner to base it on, was 660 people with a median household income of 52,000. And it's in a disadvantaged community, which was, one of the qualifying factors, but not the severely disadvantaged. So if we go back again and look at Victorville here, it's pretty much everything inside that half-mile area is severely disadvantaged, but it's also that population of 2,022 people. If we look at Adelanto's site itself, it's a population of 3,110 around that area with a median household income of 24,000 in comparison. And it's also all severely disadvantaged community on that one. And then Hesperia on their site, 2,139 and basically 39,000 income. And here this one's closer to you in the sense that they do have severely disadvantaged that falls in the half mile, but they also have some of the other just disadvantaged community that falls into that area. So I think it's really a combination of the population and the disadvantaged community settings that you were working against. And as Kim had kind of pointed out to the state when they gave us a debrief, said, they were just saying, well, you need to just find a place in town that's gets you the best points. And but Kim was saying, well, we're not going to put our central community park in the outskirts of town or some other part of town that doesn't make sense. So once that decision's been made that the park's got to go in that location, you're kind of stuck on the demographics at that point. And the lower density housing, certainly in comparison to the other four or the other three that I had just brought up there, is quite a bit lower. So you definitely, you qualified for the program, but it all depended on how much competition there was and where that break point seemed to be. And you're just, even though, they have the similar situations being in the high desert and similar programs that they're asking for, from what we can see, the biggest difference are the median income as well as the population and then the disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged community settings around that. So it's, really hard to tell, but I'm sure that makes, doesn't make you feel any better that a lot of your neighbors ended up getting a grant. Now, most of their grants were also a lot less than the maximum amount too. So there might've been a strategy there. The dollar amounts that they were, being awarded was not the full grant request like we had in it. So those are just a couple of points that I can think of.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Yeah, and I think that was our takeaway from the state as well. Again, it's a bummer, but at the end of the day, it was in parallel to the master planning effort. And I think the silver lining and some of the positive things that we can report on is that we've already submitted for another grant, a per capita grant with the state. And then we're currently working on 2 grants right now to hopefully give us a chance on some additional funding. And then there's a lot of grants and other funding sources from the state and national level that should be coming out this year as well. So, again, we're committed to getting this built. If it's in a phased capacity or however it may be, we'll continue to look for grants and support in any way we can. This was definitely a strong try. I think we got almost all of the other points. So, we did our best to at least give ourselves the best shot there. But at the end of the day, really the demographics are a big part of that grant. Out of the 100 points, again, that's about 30 points. So, if you don't have the demographics in your favor, then it's really, it's a bit harder to compete on those. And the final note on that is that really you don't quite know, and the state even was reluctant to let us know how many points we received as far as the demographics there. But they don't release that ahead of the grant. So you're speculating to some degree going into it. You don't quite know. All you know is if you're eligible and to what extent you're eligible. We knew that would be something that potentially we wouldn't get all the points for. So we just tried to strategize to get everything else that we can. So with that, it is a bummer, but we did get some good results out of that in a sense of, moving along in the public process to get more input. And with that, a lot of the work we're using actually is being applied to this grant that we're going after that's going in next week. So there's a lot of value in that. And we're hoping that a lot of the outreach and some of the other things that we did for the Prop 68 grant could be reused for grants in the future.
And I'd also suspect that if you went and took the fact finder and, decided if we found a site in the city to put a new park that had the best points, you're probably not going to find too much better than what you end up having. Unfortunately, your density is a lot lower than these other communities, and the disadvantage points are there. At first, we thought it might have had something to do with the fact that we were being classified as an expansion because your small neighborhood park there had to count towards it. And that definitely, drops your persons per acre. But compared to your competitors or your neighbors, I should say, they have a much higher park standard that they're meeting than Phelan is relative to the number of people, number of persons per thousand that an acre actually supports. So it just seems that unless you were out there trying to search for a whole new place to have a new town center, your choice was already kind of determined for you in this particular site. And, you had a competitive project, but not compared to the rest of the state and the areas that most likely got all these. But at least, for your neighbors that we're looking at, definitely the thing that stood out wasn't the fact that it was a new or expansion on a park comparison. It had a lot more to do, it appears to us, to be the population that would be served by that park, the median household income, and the disadvantaged category. All of them had severely disadvantaged community under that half-mile circle.
All right, thank you so much. Do any of the board members have any questions? No?
I just wanted to thank you for your efforts. And I appreciate all the work you went through to do that. Your layout and especially your video is scoring high points with a lot of people in our community. So I want to just be sure you understand that I appreciate all the work you did. Thank you.
We certainly appreciate the opportunity working with you on this and continue to work on it. It's been a great project. You guys have all been a great client, and I think it's a great project for the community. It's just finding the money is really what it comes down to at this point.
All right, thank you again, guys. We really appreciate it.
All righty. Thanks for your time, man. We'll get working back on the grants.
Sounds good.
All right. Bye-bye.
Have a good evening. Thank you.
All right, so then we will move on to agenda item number 4, review of preliminary community survey results by Rincon Strategies.
Thank you. I believe we have Chris Collier here tonight online to talk about the preliminary results of the community survey.
Good evening, Chair and board members. I wanted to just give you a little bit of an overview as to where we were after last week. Typically in polling, it's a pretty tight turn to get anything out this soon after going to the field the next day. So we've been in for about 4.5 days in the field collecting information. And at this time, what I'm able to show you at least a few data points on, so it can help guide your discussion a little bit later this evening, is we have just under 200 responses. Our goal was 400. The responses that have finished to date have been mostly through digital data collection. So a lot of the live dial telephone work doesn't get blended in until the end, and there will still be some additional weighting and margin of error, settlement, things like that. So essentially what we're looking at should not be construed as, this is the end all be all, but more, this is a sense of direction or order of magnitude of where the community is on a few items. And what I was particularly wanted to bring up, and I'm going to share two different things on screen. We'll do one of them first, I'll switch to the other with some additional information. We had it marked as question, I believe it was question 10 on the original survey draft. When we put the survey into the digital system, I had it as A, B, C, D, and what it ended up being was 11 or 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. But essentially the question we asked and what we're looking at right here is preliminary information. Again, these may be settled by a few percentage points in any given direction. By the time we get the final data here and crunch the numbers for you all for a real presentation, but just to guide your discussion, we asked how the community felt about various elements of the park that were not the pool. That's kind of what we'll call everything but the pool project. We took the different elements and said, are they very important to you, somewhat important to you, not important to you at all, or are you unsure? And so what I've done here in rows 2 and 3, as you're looking at this data, is we're looking at the ranking of 1 to 8 of what was most important to least important based on the percentages. And then we totaled up the total level of importance, what was very important plus somewhat important. What did people care about at all? And what jumped us off the page at 85%, everyone that was surveyed in this first batch essentially said the events plaza was very important to them, with 40% saying very important, 45% saying somewhat important. Next was the kids' playground, 81.7% combined with 52.8% saying that was very important and 28.9% saying it's somewhat important. The intensity there, that 52% was the highest of any of the very important categories. Number 3, the sports field, 34% say very important, 43% somewhat important. And then the dog park at 76%, 42.6% very important, 34% important. And again, as you're talking about how this is going to be funded and the phasing and those kind of things, this is just data that I wanted to make sure you were armed with early, since that discussion is happening this evening. And we're not quite finished with the data collection and full analysis of the poll. We'll be able to dig a lot more into the details as to how these break down and who believes this, whether they have children or whether they're in favor of the spending or they're not, and those kind of items once we have all of the data. But before I move on to the second part, I just wanted to ask if there are any questions on what you're seeing now.
Any questions?
I have one.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I was just curious, the kids' playground at 81%, what reason do you think that the splash pad kind of wouldn't go along with that?
I don't have any reason in the data to understand why they didn't go along with each other. When we went over the various items, we separated out the splash pad from the playground. So it was clear, one is different than the other, and we tested that. And, I don't know, maybe that's a lack of understanding of what the splash pad is to some of those folks versus just a playground, but, or there's a reason that maybe some people just don't want to get wet. I don't know. I don't have any data to back that up.
All right, thank you.
I just
thought maybe in other surveys because you'd think one would go along with the other, but it didn't, so.
Yeah, if I were to just take a stab at that in the dark, I would see kids' playground, sports field, and events plaza looking for things that are more of a more community gathering and less what would be specific. Equestrian, bike, skate park are all very hobby or activity centric, uses, where the others seem to be more communal, and so maybe that. And we'll dive into that when we look and see who answered this questions this way. So I'll be back in a few weeks with that.
Thank you.
What's we can't see the equestrian column.
Oh, I'm sorry. You see it now?
Yeah.
31.5. And I will say, all of the respondents, this is before, remember, in the survey design, we haven't told them how much anything costs yet. This is just looking at, hey, we're going to do an expansion of the park and put all these great things in it. What's important to you? And that's where we are in the process when we answer these questions.
So looking at these preliminary numbers, it looks like equestrian and skate park are the lowest.
They are, but to be fair, they're still over 50% of the
No, I
respondents.
understand.
Yeah,
So
okay.
far, I get it.
Right.
We can't double it, I know.
Right. But my point was the 62% still is over 50. So, if one of them were hanging out in the 35% rate, it'd be, well, that may be worth consideration for removal. But at this point, everyone likes the general idea. Everything is almost at 2/3, with the exception of the equestrian park. Everything is at that point where people are saying, yeah, this is something we want. But, just wanted to highlight the highest so that people could see those. The other thing I wanted to highlight just briefly, and I don't want to get into all of the results because that's a long conversation, again, with a little bit of limited data. But I did want to just highlight where we are at the very end, just showing the basics in relation to the pool. And again, all of this will be much more detail in a few weeks. I'm going to show this briefly. So I'm looking at the last question, which we'll consider what we call the informed ballot. We've
Can you enlarge
educated
that?
folks on. Yes, I will do my best. How about this? Better?
There we go, yeah.
Much better.
All right. Yeah, I know your screen sizes, right? So this is what we would call an informed ballot, in the sense that we inform people at this point in the survey that there is a park that will be expanded. There are costs associated with it. We also are considering a pool. There are costs associated with that. And at the end of all of the information, we ask the question one more time, what best describes you? And at this point, we've put people into 4 categories. I'm willing to pay for the pool in the park. I'm willing to pay for the park. I'm willing to not pay anything for either. And I'm not sure yet. And again, just on preliminary, I'd say that the news for building the park, regardless of the pool, is not awful. It's pretty good. 33% plus 18.8% puts you at 51.8% that are in favor of building the park. Because remember, the blue line at the top and the green line combined would be you want the park. The blue line wants the park plus the pool. So you're in a position, just an order of magnitude that people are saying, yeah, I want to expand the park. The pool only has a 33% support right now, and we'll dive into that to get a little bit more information as we get more data back. But it's not going to move 20%. It's going to move 3 or 4%, maybe 5 or 6, right? In a survey in a community this size. So you have a rough order of magnitude that around half of people are willing to do something to make it better, and there's still over 10%, 13.2% are still undecided. So there's some room for education as well, because not all of these folks are going to say no to everything. They're just not sure yet. So I wanted to leave you with that to ruminate on as you have your discussion this evening, and answer any last questions before I go back and await the rest of the data, geek out, and come back with a detailed report.
All right, any other questions from the board?
Remind me, Kim, Ms. Ward, what's the hurdle? Is it 2/3 or 55%? What are the rules these days?
For a parcel tax, I can't remember if that one is 50% plus 1 or 2/3, but I know that a special tax is 2/3. And I don't believe this falls under special tax. So I'll get that info and give it back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Deborah?
No.
Any questions? All right, no more questions?
I do have one question.
Oh, Charlie?
Mr. Collins, during the course of your polling, as you got some feedback from the respondents, did you change any of the questions at all?
No, we don't change the questions along the way.
Okay, thank you.
It has to be consistent.
Right answer.
All right, do we have any questions from the public?
How many I had one question.
Oh, go ahead.
How many contacts did it take to get to that 197? How many reach outs?
I don't have that data in front of me. I
Okay.
can, at
I'd
the
be
end of the,
curious, just curiosity.
yeah, and remember, these are digital, so
Yeah.
we send text and other digital communications, which probably means a very large amount, where the phone calls will probably have a higher connect rate, but we'll do less of them.
Okay, thank you.
Just to be picky, we don't have a hyphen between Phelan and Pinion Hills.
Sorry, that was our staff. I'll make sure
That's
for the
okay.
final report
Well,
that's
some
correct.
of us are really picky.
All right, do we have any other questions?
No.
Anybody on the Zoom have any questions?
Ms. Roden?
Am I recognized?
Yes.
Yes, when you report back on the final, you're reporting the combination of the pool results and the park only results as 51%. That's a breakout number that you're going to have to reduce when you do the crosstabs on that, correct?
Yeah, this is very preliminary.
Yeah, so you can't assume that it's 50% in favor at this point.
What I can say is, looking at the folks that were opposed at 35%, it's going to be outside of any order of a margin of error. So at this point, when you're looking at direction, you can say that generally the direction is better than it's not upside down, right? If you were the other way, it'd say, oh, it's really bad shape, but you're generally trending in the direction where it's good. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's 50% or 51.8% or whatever the exact was. It's too early to tell.
Right, and I think the answer to an earlier question is based on the school bond measures is 55% that's needed, but that should be confirmed. And that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
When do you expect the results to be complete?
I will probably have the results. The preliminary data should be in tomorrow or Friday from the phoning, and then it takes a little bit to turn that around. I'm scheduled for the 16th of February to present to the board my final report.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Collier. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. We'll see you all soon.
All right, moving on to agenda item number 5, discussion and possible action regarding Civic Center and Phelan Park project funding.
Thank you. Ms. Lawrence is going to be giving an overview of the expected revenue towards the park.
Considering that we did not get the grant, or the first grant that we applied for anyway, we started taking a look at our revenues and what revenues might be available for a loan to be able to fund the park and what kind of funding we might be able to derive from that. So on the spreadsheet before you, the first thing I addressed was the property tax and how we are using that now. And then and the second thing that we addressed was the Circle Green revenues, which is the lease at the dairy. And we have the lease that we have currently, which expires in 2024, or may expire in 2024 when they have the opportunity to purchase the land. And if they purchase the land, the lease would no longer continue, correct, Don?
Yes, I've had conversations with them. They plan on coming back to the board and asking for a renewal of that. They do have the option to purchase that, but at this point, it looks like they want to continue on to the leasing for some extended period of time.
And of course, if they did purchase the land, we would have those funds available to put toward the park as well, which we have no idea what that would be.
Could you go, you went from the first to the second pretty quickly. Could you go through the line items and kind of do just a quick explanation and from the top?
Sure. So the first line is the property tax revenue that we had up until through 2021. Those are actual numbers that we've received in property tax revenue. The second line is the property tax that we have been diverting to supplement enterprise, the water fund. And that is in the process of being eliminated.
So 2021 is a firm number?
2021 is a firm number, yes.
Okay, so you're projecting down on that?
After that, yes. And then the next line is the amount of property tax that went to the government funds. And the following is parks and then street lighting. And then the balance due property tax after those items have been funded. And from 2022 through 2026, those are projected at 1% increase per year on the property tax revenue, and then assuming a 5% increase in the distribution to the various funds.
And the difference between 2021 and 22 in the park for property tax is the maintenance of park development?
Well, that's not for the new park. We had some, there were, in parks, each year, depending on what they are needing to do through the budget process, there's different times when they might have more replacement items that need to be
Okay, so that's
repaired.
existing parks?
Yes.
Okay.
And then in 2023, I did add $150,000 beginning that year, assuming that the park development would have started to occur then.
Okay, got it. And then just real quick, the yellow line is, has been the current surplus
The yellow
through
line shows,
2021?
yes.
Okay. Okay, that's good.
Okay. And under Circle Green, we have our, the leases, and right now I have it stopping in 2024, based on the current contract that we have. And then we also have the production royalties that we'll be receiving that we haven't started receiving yet because they're still in the permitting phase on that.
Yeah, they've received their conditional use permit. It's taken forever with just getting the consultants and getting through the county with all the COVID issues. They do have that conditional use permit in place, and they're currently working on starting to ramp up the revenue. Hopefully that'll, at this point, it hasn't turned into much, but it should be over the next few years.
Mm-hmm.
But we did not calculate that in this portion of what we're doing right now.
So we're just have the lease right now, and then you're thinking production wouldn't start until 2024? Is that correct?
That's correct. 2023, 2024.
And that's when the
should-
lease would go away?
Well, the lease will
May.
continue. They're continuing to make improvements to the properties, and they are going to want to continue the lease because they wouldn't be investing literally up to $200 million in that property without having a secure long-term lease in place. And they do have the options for leasing, extending that.
So those might change, those numbers are gonna change then?
And-
Yeah, they
well,
would,
The only
yeah.
thing that would happen possibly would be if they bought the property, right, Don?
Yeah, and if they bought the property, then there's a whole negotiation that goes with that. But so far, from what they've seen, having the district being the owner of the property has been much easier to get through some of the different issues with the different
Having a public
county
agency,
agencies.
yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
So you can see in 2023 and 2024 on, that increases quite a bit, because now you're looking at the royalties for the dollar per ton that are imported onto the site.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Okay. And then moving down to the section on solid waste, which is our franchise fees from that. You can see our current revenues from that. And then I also noted down below the expenses that we, the direct expenses that we're incurring against that right now. And in 2023, the mandate for solid waste is going to be implemented. And so all of our customers will then be required to have solid waste pickup. And so we did a calculation to see what that would look like, and that would change our revenues to about $550,000 a year for that. And
Ms.
that's a
Lawrence?
state mandate.
Ms. Lawrence?
Yes.
So the last half of these rate changes happen in July, right?
I'm
The,
s-
the uniform trash collection happens in July. So the revenue would start increasing as of July.
The years I have here are actually fiscal year ending. So it would be June 30th of each of these years that you have reflected at the top.
Okay. Why are there no expenses in the out years beyond 21 for?
I was just assuming, I didn't want to make any assumptions on that just yet. And what I was just doing was trying to figure out, for example, down below, I chose to use 80%, to be able to utilize 80% of that revenue based on the expenses that we have now. And I'll be covering that more in just a moment. So, and then the other item that we have on the horizon is the revenue from the facility for renting to the sheriff's office after we build the new building and they move on to the property here.
There's an asterisk there. Does that refer to some note?
Those two items are in our future. That was the only reason I put an asterisk by them. They're not current.
Okay.
So what I did was, I'm basing this on what we know for sure, which is what's happening now, and then the possibility for the future is in the next column. So when you go down to the bottom, to pay for debt section, the square down at the bottom, the Civic Center, or the Civic Center portion of it is covered under the, 95% of it is covered under the water, because that's what it's for. And that's being covered under included in the rates already. We have that covered. Then under the next section where it says 22 to 23 parks, what I did was I pulled down 25% of the balance after taxes, balance after expenses of property tax revenue. I assumed 80% of the solid waste revenue, considering the expenses that we've had to date. And again, I'm being very cautious, try not to over-assume some of these things. The Circle Green, I assumed that, based on what we're getting now, and then that totals $533,394.48 that's available for debt service per year. And for a $10 million, that would cover a $10.7 million loan at 3%, 2.5% over 30 years. Now, for the other for the section to the right, starting in 2024, we have the, I'm assuming that we won't be using the balance of property tax revenue, because we need to kind of keep that reserved in case for other expenses associated, if we can. And then, plus the property tax revenue can be a little volatile. If we have a decline in property tax values and things like that, it can change that, as we know from what has happened to ours over the years. And then we're adding in the rental for the sheriff, and that comes up to $514,000, which covers for the base. That's for a 30-year loan. But then the royalty is only 20 years. Not only, the royalty is 20 years, which is a long time. But we couldn't obviously do a 30-year loan based on 20 years worth of revenue. So I estimated 15 years on that loan. And we could get another $8.1 million at that point. on a 15-year loan for that.
Now, in that box, we have a 0 for the Circle Green lease revenue. I would expect that the number for the lease with Circle Green for the property, that is still in effect.
So it'd be another 180,000.
Yeah, and that actually increases over time too. There's increases built in.
Yeah, increases by 3% per year.
Okay.
Okay, but then if you're counting on 74 for the sheriff, for the rental for the sheriff, right?
Yes.
We don't really have to count on that, but that'll be part of it too.
Okay, because I mean, in 2024, even if we move forward, it might not even be built.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
But we can continue to rely on some of the money from the balance of property tax, because it would be a small amount. And then also the $180,000, as Don mentioned, from the lease, that would be still in effect. And then over and above that, so for the 22 to 23, well, I'm going to refer to that as phase 1. And then the 24 on would be considered phase 2 funding. And in 22 to 23, in addition to the $10 million loan that we'd be eligible to get, we would also be able to add other funding, because we currently have money in funds available in the park fund. There's $3.9 million in there. And of course, we can't use it all because they have to have it for future replacement of existing park things. And so we're recommending up to $2 million use of that. And then another $1.5 million that's in the general fund, government fund, and which is really kind of collectively some of the balance of property tax revenues that we've had up till now. That's what that money is from. So we'd have collectively about $14 million that we could feasibly spend on the project.
Of our own money right now.
Of our own money. And then we're also working on the other grants and things, and of course, if those happen, we can always repay the loan with that money. So moving on to the next page.
I was just going to say, are there any questions on the first page before we get too far ahead?
Well, I don't know, because we haven't seen this until tonight, so I don't know what the second page says, but I'm going to ask a question anyway. Mr. Bartz, we've been talking about the Circle Green project, and at some point, there's going to be a ramp up of a dollar a ton. So when does that start? When do we start benefiting from that?
I would expect that would happen within the next year. They just got their conditional use permit, I think it was about 4 to 5 months ago. And that now they're finishing their permitting process with meeting the requirements of fire department, AQMD, and the Lahontan Water Board. So they've got, the big hurdle is already passed. They're permitted with that. Now it's just meeting the requirements, and I would expect it will ramp up between now and then, but they won't be fully permitted for the major tonnage till probably, my guesstimate would be close to a year.
So early 23 perhaps, or mid 23 or something?
Yes, that's correct.
And what was his estimate for the longer term in terms of how much, because I remember a number, but I don't want to say it until I get the number from you. What is the daily tonnage that he expects at some level of maturity?
That's a great question. By 2023, we're expecting to be about 1,000 tons a day. And then going on, moving forward from that, you start looking at 1,800 tons a day. So and that would be closer to 2024, 2025.
So at 1,000 tons a day, if the conditions are, would it still $1 a ton?
$1 a ton.
So that would be $1,000 a day. It's not in here.
That's correct. We did not count on any of that.
No, and that's fine. I just want to be clear.
Isn't that what?
Yeah, but that's calculated into the future, not the.
Not the current.
Yeah, that's in the.
It's phase 2.
Phase 2, yes.
Phase 2 funding.
Which is the last.
The last box.
The last square.
That's $655,200.
But
On the very bottom in the.
No, I understand that, but, so that's in there?
That's in addition to the first box.
Okay, so the Circle Green royalty revenue, the 655, is the $1 a ton per day thing, right?
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't clicking on that. But if I remember correctly, you said, Mr. Bartz, that up above the line there, the Circle Green revenue still would be about $170,000 a year?
Yes, with the.
So, and that's blank right now.
3% escalator built in per
And
year.
that's blank right now, so,
Yes.
so we could legitimately add that?
Well, the way that it's set up in this box, we're accounting for that revenue in the first box, which is the 2022, 2023. In the 2024 box is kind of a phase 2, so that's in addition to the first. So it's already collected there in the first, but it doesn't show the 3% increase on top of the 169,777. So it would be a little bit of cash, but it's not.
Well, actually, I didn't, that's not included, Don, because
Oh, that is not
I assumed that was gonna go away if they
Oh.
sold the property.
Yeah, okay.
So, worst case
I stand
scenario, they sell the property, we get the property value, the money from the property. Well, I don't know if it's worst case, because I'm not sure which is gonna be better, but we either get the lease or we get the money for the sale of the property, so
So
there will
that's-
be funding there that will replace that.
Okay, so depending upon what actually occurs,
Yes,
that's 170 may be there, may not be there, depending upon whether we sell or not.
that's correct.
Yeah, what I would recommend, I know that Circle Green is working on a sublease at this point. So they will be bringing that at some point within the next month, probably to the board for discussion. And I think at that point, that might be a good time to tie down a longer-term lease and take care of the issues that we would have with really not having a commitment beyond that. But we could at least find out what the thoughts are on that.
And so that potential sublease is not in these numbers.
No, that is not. It's not, there's nothing firmed up yet, but there will be some additional revenue coming from the sublease. But how it offsets how it works with the tipping fee or the dollar per ton we get, that has to be
Okay.
negotiated and see where we're at. But there is going to be some potential additional revenue from that, but at this point, we don't have anything solid to be able to present numbers on that.
So, Ms. Lawrence, you said, I don't want to misquote you, so if I say it wrong, correct me. But I thought you said we had about $14 million of our own money to put toward this project?
borrowing
It would
plus-
be $10.7 million loan. So if you're looking at the boxes. that are
10.7 plus the 3.5.
below-
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay, so together, between the loan and us, at 14 million approximately.
a little bit more than that, yes.
Yeah, okay, so, but now, again, the board, I don't think, unless I took a nap somewhere, I don't think the board has actually seen a total cost for the total park.
That's what we're getting to next.
That'll be the next page.
Okay, so I'll hold that.
So first we had to decide, okay, how much money can we spend? How much money can we afford to spend right now? And right now, we can do the 14 million, which we'll call that phase one. Phase 2 would be in a few years when we see how the royalties pan out and these other possibilities pan out, and then we can look at phase 2 and what we might be able to do with that.
Yeah. By the time we get to that point, phase 1 will still be under construction for some time. It's a pretty big project. So as that is progressing, we'll see what the revenues look like and the actual numbers coming in, and the board can make a determination, to do
That's
additional
what that's
work.
gonna be and where they wanna spend it. But
Okay.
based on what we have now, if you're ready to turn to the next section?
No, I have one question.
Okay.
Just because I see 250,000 and 533,000, correct? That's available
Where you at?
Yeah,
in the boxes. The enterprise's
250.
share is 250
okay.
a year, correct?
The enterprise is not part of this at all. It's funded under something completely different. It has,
That is for the civic building.
that's for the civic building.
Okay, I understand that. But right now, what you have calculated available is $250,000 annually from the enterprise fund.
To pay specifically for that one building, yes.
Available
Yes.
Yes.
for enterprise-related thing. Okay.
For that building specifically.
And the other calculation using your formulas here is a little over 530,000 available non-enterprise.
Correct,
Okay.
exactly.
But the park fund has to pay approximately 5% of the other building, right?
That's included in the subsequent pages, and my understanding is that some of those fees are included in that, which is some of the site work and those numbers.
Well, I guess my point is 14 million plus loan and our funds, a little bit over $14 million is available for debt service. Did I say that right?
Yes, that's correct. Oh, no, no.
$533,000 per year is available for debt service right now.
Debt service. But
And
we
then-
could, in total, we could pay out about $14 million toward the project.
10.7
I think I said that
loan.
right.
That's
Okay, I
correct.
said it
Yeah,
right the
10.7
third time or
loan and the
something.
rest in
Okay,
cash.
so you're going to tell us in the next page or something, you're going to tell us how much the park is going to have to pay for the civic center.
Well, in what they, should we move on to the next page? Are we okay with the revenues now?
Yeah,
I'm
right.
good up to this point.
We can
Yeah,
co- we
go
can
ahead.
come back if you have another question.
So the answer to my question is yes. You're going to
Okay.
tell us about it now. Okay.
So, this is what KTUA put together for the district. And the board determined that they wanted to apply for $8.2 million in funding, which is area A through I. Part of that includes the government portion of the site that's getting, because it overlaps, the two, the Civic Center and the,
Yeah, you have street improvements, parking lots,
and.
things that would benefit not only the enterprise, but coming from parks also.
Yes, and so these numbers up here include their share of those preliminary, the plumbing, the electrical.
Infrastructure.
The dirt movement, all of the infrastructure costs were part of those costs.
Their
Is my understanding.
proportionate share of the infrastructure and work needed to
Right.
build the complex.
Is already included in those, in these numbers that we're looking at. So what we're looking at right now is strictly the government portion of this project. The parks portion.
So when the board looked at the grant that we put in as the $8.2 million, it included areas which you have the map, and it was area A, event plaza, B, demonstration and event garden, C, which was the community garden, D, tennis court, E, terrace seating, F, event lawn, G, the multi-purpose rec field, H, which was the playground, which scored pretty high, and also I, the restroom and concession building of the picnic area out there. So that, if you're looking at $13 million or $14 million, that portion of it is about $8.2 million. So there's additional funding. Was it 13 or 14, Lorianne? It's
14.
14 million, okay.
14 million.
So, $14 million that we believe that you could safely work with, some of it loan, some of it cash. What the board picked before, and the board can make other decisions, obviously, but it seemed to be a good sequence based on the kind of how the park would evolve and be built out. We have some issues with Joshua trees and things like that in some of it, and that's why part of that construction was moved over kind of like the A, B, C, D up through I. And then the outlying areas were additional. So you could have, if the board were to choose, hey, we like the option that we discussed before, you'd be looking at about $8.2 million. And then if you wanted to add another multi-purpose field with softball field, you're looking at another $2.5 million.
Okay, we're going a little too fast.
Okay,
So let's start with the infrastructure. The cost to the parks is,
Included in
Where is it?
A through I.
But in the infrastructure part or area cost or just that total?
The total infrastructure cost, C Phase 1 shared
is
infrastructure cost.
the total infrastructure cost is 2.6, is that correct?
if you were to look at phase 1 and phase 2 combined,
Well, because we're gonna be moving, you get all the equipment and stuff out there. You could stub some electrical and stuff, but the dirt moving probably would have to be done.
yeah, from what I understand,
If you look at,
well,
on the top here, see at the very, very top line above A?
It's 1.6 and 1.4,
Yeah, the 1.4 is actually enterprise portion,
that's the enterprise portion.
and then the 1.6 is actually this this section's portion.
And 1.6 is the parks?
And then the 811 down at the bottom goes toward that phase 2 stuff.
811 is later parks.
Yes. So the site improvements are all included in these things.
Okay, so the initial phase, which is what you gotta do, is the infrastructure. That's the grading and the curbing and the electrical and water and all that, is about $3 million.
correct.
Yes.
3 plus, okay. So that gets much of the area done. Okay, so now what's next? I got that.
Okay, so, and going kind of back to the infrastructure parts, if you were to look at phase 2, we would have to, depending on what was picked, the infrastructure costs would be added with each of those line items to extend some of it out. When you're doing, let's say that we did phase 1 to begin with and ignored phase 2 right now, what you would have, you would stub out the utilities into those areas for the future phase, but you have a lot of grading to where you couldn't have the infrastructure in place because they're going to be doing a lot of cutting, a lot of filling. And then as that was developed, those infrastructure costs would be expended to extend it. So you'd do it to the best logical approach you possibly could for this. So I think one of the things we would be looking at and like for the board to at least start thinking about is, do you like the choice that was made for phase 1? And then if we're good with that, then what would you choose out of the phase 2, thinking probably ones adjacent to the construction areas are going to be the most easily built. Yeah, because if you picked K or L or something like that, it's further away from some of the other facilities, and then you're going to have more grading in between. You might have open areas. So I think it would be nice to look at logically what is semi-adjacent to what would be part of that first phase. But actually looking at it,
The closest one.
yeah, well, H is kind of that playground. It's kind of centrally located in everything H and I.
That's in the first area.
Yeah, and then J and K are right adjacent to that. So I think they did a good job with kind of laying out how this could work. But if you had if the board chose to move forward with or consider the phase 1 at $8.2 million, and then you could pick and choose some of these other options, whether you wanted an additional multi-purpose field, if you wanted to move forward with like the skate park and pump track, up till we got into the range of
Yeah,
the
we have
funding.
to look at what funding we have now. We have 14 million.
Yeah,
So-
14 million.
So to do phase 1 of the park stuff is 8.2, say 8.5. to estimate, and then, that's what I would anyways, 8.5, and then, that's that. What about, are we gonna have another, something else on the building?
Another, I'm sorry, I don't
Well,
understand.
so we got 14 million, and you've got 8.5 or less than 9
Right.
for phase one. What are we doing with the other 5?
Yeah, what I would recommend, one of the things we have, which we don't have a firm price on, is the gymnasium type building. Going to be very expensive. I think that's going to be probably in the $5 million range by itself.
What about the office?
The office is already included. That's separate from what we're looking at right here. We have the funding for the office under that first box, under the enterprise fund. So that's a completely separate fund, funded by water rates. So what we have here, that $14 million, is excluding the building. And we
Yeah.
already have the building funded.
That's for
From
everything
another
basically
source.
from here back.
So now the project goes from 14 million.
Okay, wait a minute, the office building is funded by
Enterprise fund.
only the enterprise fund?
Only the enterprise fund,
95%?
and a little
95%.
95% of the
Yes.
enterprise fund?
So built into our rate structure, that is funded currently.
Okay.
And as far as the community center goes, that was the other building that was on that the original 5 acres. That could be actually done in phase 2
Right.
when we get to that.
So the 250 or 25, what was it? 250,000 is the funding for a loan for the enterprise?
Yes.
The building?
Correct. And their proportionate share of the infrastructure.
Okay, so,
That's already included in the rate
yes,
structure, yeah.
I'm just wrapping my head around everything
There's a
here.
lot of numbers.
So the enterprise, the second box on the first sheet is the 250,000. That goes toward funding the office.
The civic complex.
The civic complex.
And comes
Okay.
from the enterprise fund.
Right, I know it says complex, but I'm just saying, so that is what you estimate is necessary for that complex?
That's correct.
Okay. And then this, you're just basically talking, because there's still additional funds here that you're not using.
Right, which is, where the.
For instance, property tax, I know it goes up and down, but, I mean, if everything crashes, it's gonna be really hard on everybody, but you'd assume that it's gonna be somewhat stable at least.
Well, and the other thing, as far as the balance of property tax revenues, once this gets fully built out, there are going to be additional costs associated with running the new park center. We did put $150,000 in.
Yeah, you have a
starting that
certain
1
amount
year
built into it.
For that 1 year, or beginning that 1 year, but there may be other costs associated with that as well.
Okay, well,
So,
so how
We
much?
don't want to run that down.
Well, that's why I was just asking
Yeah.
this. How much of a cushion is built in that's not on here? There's a cushion that's in there, but that I don't see, so.
Well, the
Just
cushion-
wanted to
It's a
know.
Lori comfort zone cushion.
Yeah, well,
which is very
I'd be
conservative.
curious to know what that is.
The cushion is actually our the balance of our property tax revenues.
That's why I mentioned it.
Yeah.
So what's left in that is it still a cushion
It's our
for?
cushion, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I kind of
Because
got,
we can't, obviously, we don't
No, you don't
want
want
to
to-
have debt service of every penny that we have.
That's
right?
why I'm asking you. And where is it? Okay, it's
Yeah.
in that fund. Got it.
And that's why I was conservative also with, as far as the lease versus the buying out thing too. I didn't, I wanted to be conservative about these things, so.
yeah. So I kind of went down a trail of, let's start looking at what we can buy. I think, this is a lot to look at. I think what we're really looking for tonight is we have a projected amount of money that we think we're able to borrow at hopefully a reasonable rate. And if the board gives consensus to move forward with acquiring those funds, because it's a process to do that. And then over the next few months period of time, we can have a workshop, we can have additional meetings with the board to look at, you know, what would you like to see that's going to add up within the budget that we,
Up to the
that we can have.
Up to the 14.
Yeah, up to that $14 million. If that's an acceptable one, we could pursue looking at what would the actual cost be for getting $11.7 million loan to move forward with this.
Because things could change, that 8 million by the time we get this going.
Yeah, because
Yes.
construction costs have been all over the place over the past couple of years. Even looking at some of the costs for the grading for this site, it was a pretty stiff price for the grading. We talked to one of the local contractors, and it looks like the prices are maybe a little bit lower than what was projected, substantially lower. So but some things may go up. You know, you start looking at $80 for a sheet of plywood, that should be 20. And it's just gonna be all over the place at the time of construction. But if we can kind of come up with, you know, does that sound like a reasonable amount based on what we presented to start pursuing the line? We're obviously not going to sign loan docs tomorrow or anything like that. But I think staff would have the opportunity to shop those loans and find out what our best rates are and then come back to the board and give you some options for what this looks like.
And plus the timing is kind of.
It's kind of time.
Yeah.
I mean, we kind of need to make sure this coincides with the building of the other building, right? I mean, of the main building, so we can start paying for the infrastructure costs associated with this part of it, right?
Yes.
So we have to apply for a loan for that as well.
Yeah, and when we start, we want to have, there's a lot of the grading that's gonna occur on the back part of the property, you know, like in the M, F, and G areas, somewhere in there, kind of around the Joshua trees right now. There's a lot of grading that's going to occur on that portion of the project that's gonna be associated with the initial phase, with phase one.
Well, yeah, and you would want to do some of all of that when you're grading for the building and. I mean,
Yeah,
it just
we don't
makes
want to
sense.
have the mobilization costs, which can be quite expensive to even have them show up on the job site, get their equipment out here, get the yard secured.
Right.
We would prefer to be able to do that at one time and not have to pay twice for it.
And how long does it take to get loans, Lori? I mean, like say everything's in the perfect world and we said, yeah, do all this.
I'm trying to remember how long it took us to.
Before it funds.
It
Like
took us a
30 to-
few months through the iBank.
Yeah, a couple months, because there's a process, but the other thing is that we want to kind of lock in the interest rates as soon as possible.
They're gonna go up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is a concern, so,
Even a 1/4% can make a big
big
difference when you're
difference,
looking
yeah.
at, millions of dollars.
Well,
Yeah.
you've got 3.5 million. That's enough to do the infrastructure.
Yes, I agree. That would be, we could start with that.
Huh?
Of our money.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have cash to do the infrastructure
Mhm.
if,
Yeah, we
wanna
have the
get
cash
started
to
on it,
fund
so-
part of it, basically, $3.5 million, somewhere in that range. So we could definitely start with the project, but we want to have,
All the ducks
we
in a row.
want to get the interest rates before they go up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions from the board?
Not for me. Been answered.
Well, yes. This is one of those situations where, and I understand the timing of it, this is not by way of a complaint, but I don't feel like I've had enough time to look at these numbers to make an intelligent decision about taking any action tonight. Because we literally got it an hour ago. So, the thing that I just want to say here that this $28 million for the park, less the part that's funded by the water part, the 3.4, we still haven't talked at all, except maybe a sentence or two here and there, about this gymnasium. That cost is not anywhere on here.
it's under the community
The
center.
community
building
center.
here. It's a $7.6 million on the bottom, under site buildings.
Oh. Okay, I see it.
The community center, that's That's the gymnasium?
That's the gymnasium.
Oh, so we're talking in code now, okay.
And that's the part that, could be.
So that's
could be part of phase
$7.6
two.
million? So that's actually in the 28, okay, I stand corrected now that I understand the codes. Okay, so this is why instant analysis is not good. Okay, so, so the total project cost is 28 million, including the community center.
Where's 28 million?
So
He's rounding up the
Oh, okay, I was like, I don't see a
27,966.
28 anywhere.
Yeah.
27,966 is pretty close to 28.
I know, but I'm trying to follow along. I need all the numbers.
Well, I mean, okay, 27,966.
Thank you.
Wow. So earlier in the conversation, Mr. Robertson, somebody was talking about a number that I cannot find on here, 811,000. What was that conversation about?
That's the Phase 2 infrastructure costs, right above the yellow section.
Oh,
For
the total
parks.
infrastructure.
Oh, wow. Talk about burying that one.
Yeah, that's the later parks. That's the second phase of parks.
Correct.
Okay.
Or it could be part of phase
It's
one,
a little
too,
over,
depending on what
it's
the
a
board
little over
decides.
3 for the initial, and then if you wanted to just do all of the infrastructure, it'd be about 4 million. Up front, in other words.
So the other part that's missing here, at least in, I haven't had the revelation of where this number is on this page. What are the operating costs for the Civic Center building?
That would be under the enterprise fund. They're not part of, that's not part of this discussion.
The community center, I'm sorry, I apologize, I said the wrong word. Community center building.
Oh, okay, so on the first page, I noted that we added $150,000 per year in maintenance for the parks starting in 2023. Up under the property tax revenue area.
That's just an estimate,
It's an
number,
estimate, yeah.
placeholder.
Where it goes from 641 up to 823.
So some of that could be maintenance of the building.
I would, yeah. Well, what building though?
So,
Community center, community.
The community center building is not part of phase one, so we're not including any maintenance of that in this
Oh,
discussion.
the 150 is just for parks?
Just for the parks part of it, yeah,
That's your estimate for the parks, okay.
yeah.
well, that was my question. The answer is we don't have that.
We have not incled that yet, no.
Okay.
That
So
would be part
I
of
got
phase-
that one right.
Yeah, we would do that
It'd
as
be
part of
phase
phase
two.
two, yes.
Okay.
If that's what the board decides they want to use the money on.
Well, and again, these numbers are all, I mean, we've seen some of these numbers we saw in earlier presentation by K2A, but this is the first time we're really having a chance to kind of digest it and understand it. So if we suggest that phase one at 8.2 million, that fits a couple of criteria. In other words, it's within our 10.7 million, within our 14 million potential. It also, it plays well with our stakeholders because that's the priority that the stakeholders gave to these things. And so we're being faithful to the community, our constituents. That's what they asked for. And so then the question has been asked in a couple different ways, I think. So then if we say we want to go ahead with phase one at 8.2 million, and we have 14 or so then what else do we do?
And that's the question, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and I want to, that's what I was trying to get down to that. Now,
But we don't have to decide that tonight.
no, I know, but the question came up, and I'd like to suggest something here. In terms of the survey that, understand partial data from our survey, from the community survey. And also, if I remember correctly, when we did our planning, the stakeholders ranked the skate park and equestrian lower than the other items as well, if I remember correctly. If I'm wrong, say so. So I think that, well, so that's just a statement. Then the other thing is that we don't have, in terms of prioritization, we don't have where we want the community center building. Right? That's not in any of these priorities.
Say that again, Charlie.
Well, we have priorities for the phase one. These things were prioritized by the stakeholders.
Yeah, I understand.
By
Okay.
park, the parks.
Yes.
yeah.
And those things, but, and when we talk about these things back here in the map and so forth,
But what building?
the community center building isn't even on, it's in A, I guess. But, well, it's not, it's actually carved out of A.
Correct.
So the community center building has not been prioritized, that I can tell, at all.
Well, none of the phase 2 items have been,
I understand,
and that's.
but
why-
at least we have some information from the stakeholder surveys, which we know are not scientific, they where y'all come and talk, and so we don't have very much valid data on how we would prioritize the community center building. That's my opinion, viewpoint so far. Now, it seems to me that if we do, let's say for instance, we do the community center building ahead of other things like the skate park and equestrian area, the community center building has a higher operating cost than those other two because they're basically inert, right? They're basically static. If somebody, you all come and play on it, doesn't require a lot of maintenance. So I think when we make that decision about how we want to prioritize that, we need to take into consideration what is the operating cost to have people that are going to be there to staff that building, to run the sports programs, all of that stuff. Welcome to the world, Steve.
Well, yeah, but didn't we have that at one point in time where we had estimated numbers?
Well.
Not
yeah,
to say that I don't see them now, Charlie, you're correct, but I know at some point I recall seeing something.
Well, but all I'm saying is, you may be right, and I'm not, that's not my point.
No, it's not the.
My point is, I'm probably speaking about stuff we need to talk about in the future. Because we don't really have we don't have enough data
To know.
to make
Right.
have an intelligent conversation about the community center building because we just don't know. We know what its estimated cost is, $7.7 million. But we don't, there's just a lot of things missing. So I guess, long story, roundabout business here, I'm thinking if I were going to add to the 8.2 million with phase one to get to the 14 million, I wouldn't pick equestrian and skate park. I would pick, well, obviously I would pick the sports fields for obvious reasons, but in the dog park, because I think even the dog park in those fields came out high in our Rincon survey. So if we were going to say, well, what are we going to add to the 8.2 to get to the 14? I would suggest you would be area J and K. We may not be at the point where we need to make that decision, but that would be kind of the way I see it with the data that I currently have.
And some of that will probably have to do with a logical progression too, I would think, because like N is a parking lot basically, right? But that's gonna be needed in order to be able to accomplish other things at some point. I don't know the
Well-
logical time that would.
Area N, that's the one up by the
Stall.
school, right?
Yeah, I think what we would like to do would be to agendize this for the next meeting, give everybody some time to digest this, give you time to come in and ask questions, sit down, and we can, if you have questions about the individual parts of this, we could certainly do that. And
Because
then,
you're just looking for direction if we want.
We're just
you
looking for direction.
to start
And-
looking at
But
loans
we'd be
and
looking
come
for the
back to that.
direction
So is
at
that,
that meeting to come back and say, how much do you want us to go after? And then we would
Correct.
have
So
to-
we're just looking for a consensus of the board on whether or not we want you to go out, look for these funding options, the interest rates and stuff, and then we can nitpick on what we want to add, J, K, or whatever to it.
but
I would
could-
say we could do that at the next meeting, we'd be looking. for
Correct.
that.
Okay,
but
so,
couldn't we have that done now, though? Go ahead and go, go out for funding.
Yeah.
right? Go out for funding. They
Yes.
could come back to the board next week. We could still have time to go in and ask them any questions we want or whatever. But at least then we'll have more information that meeting.
Correct.
So that would be my suggestion.
Yes. So, yes, that's what we're looking for, right? Is the consensus of the board that it's okay for them to go out and look for funding and bring the information back to us. We don't have to make a decision on what we want to include on top of the 8.2 million.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, I think that would be to confirm the numbers that you've put in here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sounds
Agreed.
great.
Are we all agreed?
I agree.
I'm agreed.
yeah.
Okay. Perfect.
Oh, do we need, it says possible action, so we don't need to take any action, just agendize it for the next meeting? Is that going to give you enough time, a week?
I believe I recorded you, there is consensus from the board to authorize staff to start looking into getting loans to bring that back. However, there will be an agenda item at the next meeting to discuss this further.
There you go.
Perfect. Thank
Next
you very
week.
much.
Yes.
Okay, so my question, is that going to be sufficient time for you to get all the information you need to present at the meeting next week?
For the loans, you mean?
Well,
We'll have the
we're
preliminary.
going to have two agenda items. I just want to know if they're going to have information to present to us that is going to give them sufficient time to give it that data. That's all.
I would have thought.
We can have preliminary information, at least on what the expected interest rates are. We wouldn't have any kind of application or anything formal or anything.
No, of course
We could at
not.
least give you several options where we would be looking at.
All right, question.
Is the community center the same thing as the gymnasium?
Yes. It is, yes.
And then what would this be called?
A room,
Senior Center.
Yeah.
community center.
The board could make a decision on what to do. These buildings could probably
The
use some
Michael Pilecki room.
These buildings could probably get some renovation at some point, possibly as part of the construction, whether there's money in phase 1 or phase 2. But a decision would have to be made, but I think these could be modernized a little bit from, they've been here for a number of years.
Forever. Look at the date on that painting back there.
All right, do we have any questions from the public, Ms. Ward?
I see one person left from the general public, phone number 8095. Okay, I guess not.
I guess not. All right, then we are moving on to agenda item 6, discussion and possible adoption of resolution number 2022-02, authorizing submittal of applications for all Cal Recycle grant and payment programs for which the Phelan Pinion Hills Community Service District is eligible. Mr. Barnes.
Thank you. Ms. Ward is going to take these next two items.
Yes, so Jen and I are working on 3 grants. Most of them are due Friday. We've been very busy. One of them is a grant with Cal Recycle. We're going to be requesting approximately $300,000. And in order to submit for the grant, we do need this resolution. The bonus is this gives us 5 years to submit for any Cal Recycle grants for which we're eligible, so we won't need to come back to do this for each and every grant. And so therefore, we are asking for the board to adopt resolution number 2022-02.
All right, do any of the board members have any questions?
I'll move staff recommendation.
I'll second.
All right, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, motion is approved. Right. Moving on to agenda item 7, discussion and possible adoption of resolution number 2022-03, approving the application for land and water conservation fund for the Phelan Park expansion project. Mr. Bartz.
Ms. Ward will be taking this one also.
So this is one of 2 park grants that we are working on submitting. This one does require a resolution. This one is for Land and Water Conservation Fund. There are some caveats if we do get it in terms of what we will have to do with the park as far as designating it. We will have to protect it. But if we get awarded that, we can have the discussion at that time. And we're not going after the full 6 million. We've been speaking with KTUA. We believe for this portion of the grants that we're putting in, elements A, B, C, and D would be the most applicable because they meet some of the grant goals, as well as we already have that portion of the CUP or the approved. So we would be able to complete those project elements within the grant term, which we have to do. There is a match, and so when we're continuing our discussion with what we would like to build with our loan funds, this could be a consideration if we're awarded this grant. We won't know till midsummer if we would receive this one. So any funds we receive from this program, we would have to match. So if we get 3 million, we have to contribute 3 million. Oh, I don't know what the total is. We're still working on the final figures. There's up to 6 million that you can submit for, but we're not going to be submitting for the full amount. I don't know the amount yet. And if the board does want to adopt this resolution and authorize staff to submit for this grant, I do need a roll call vote.
Okay. Any questions?
The matching funds, it can be from a loan, it can be any which way.
However we want to do it.
Okay. Mark, you look like you had a question.
No, I was just turning everything on to get ready to voice vote.
Okay. Any questions over here? Deborah, Charlie?
How will you decide how much to apply for the grant?
KTUA is getting us updated figures on the specific components in elements A, B, C, and D that we can apply for as part of this grant. And so it'll be determined based on that. I mean, we're literally working right up to
I understand
the
that's
hour
okay.
to
Yeah,
submit this.
I appreciate that. Heaven knows I appreciate the effort that's being put in by you and our consultants, KTUA. I shudder to ask this question, but are we subject to the same criterion that we had for the Prop 68 grant?
I can't remember if this is a competitive one or not. Jen, do you know if this one has the same?
Yes, it is.
Steve says yes.
Okay,
And
Steve
so
is
we're
saying yes.
We're going to be subject to the same criterion.
Yes.
Oh, swell.
But we're not going to stop trying.
No, I know. It's just frustrating when, if you look at our community and you try and compare our community over 128 square miles to Hesperia, Arapahoe Valley, any of the cities to our east, we dwarf them. I mean, we dwarf them, yes. We're way bigger than any of them. And we have, a quarter or half of the people. And that's my frustration, is
Right.
that we haven't found the right grant that fits our characteristics for an underserved community.
The Land and Water Conservation Fund grant, so this one we're talking about, that one is focused on placemaking and community building and having community spaces. And so the project elements that we're applying for and that definitely meet that. And now we can even hopefully have some more survey results with the poll to show that our community really does want that events plaza. And so that's going to help support this grant. And It is slightly easier doing these grants now that we did the monolithic Prop 68 grant because we have so much data. We have a lot of narrative already written. So we're just reworking it and making sure we're painting a good picture of the community and the needs. Again, we're still subject to the same conditions, but you never know who's going to apply. These grants come up so fast and they close just as fast. So we've had just a few weeks for this. Whereas the Prop 68 grant, there was a long time to work on that, and they extended it. So that allowed for many more applicants than they probably normally would have. And so you never know who's going to submit, so we're going to keep on trying. As I inappropriately misquoted Michael Jackson to the amusement of our consultants, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, which apparently Wayne Gretzky said. So. And I now know.
Wrong sport.
So
thankfully, too, for the California beautification one, we do meet some of the underserved community criteria that we didn't meet for the other grants as well.
Yeah, that one we don't need a resolution for, so we're not talking about that
Right.
tonight.
Yeah.
But the Caltrans grant that we're putting in for, we definitely have better odds of getting.
You did say that we wouldn't know until summer, so if we are committed to the loans that we will be getting, how would that affect us as far as being able to match the amount that we would receive?
Yeah, so that is definitely something you're going to want to be mindful of in considering what you want to fund. Now, also, we did point out that those elements are part of our already approved CUP. So those are going to be quicker to go through planning and get built. So that's why we chose those. For the Caltrans grant that we put in for, we are basically sticking to section N. And that is, parking area and driveway. And then we're also pulling out the little sections of L and H and I and K and J and G, just the trail portions, because they're interested in more pathways and beautification and creating access points. And so our narrative on that is we're trying to connect that elementary school to our existing park and this community center in a safe way. And so that's why we don't have exact numbers in like even this chart, which is great. When you pull out the specific components of each of those, which we're going after the pathways, it's not in here yet.
Okay, thank you. All right, do I have a motion?
I'll move the item.
I'll second.
All right,
And real quickly, I
Yeah.
need to do the roll call.
got you. All right, so we need to do roll call.
Yes, so Director Johnson,
Yes.
Director Phillips,
Yes.
Director Kuyava,
Yes,
Director Robert,
Yes.
Director Hoffman.
Yes.
Thank you.
thank you. All right. That was all I have. So if there's no further business, we adjourn at 6:34. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for.